The great war chamber of Vornath Prime was filled with the low growls and echoing voices of hundreds of alien leaders, each more fearsome than the last, their sharp fangs glinting under the blue light that shimmered across the walls made of living stone. The air itself seemed to tremble with power as the most dangerous beings in the galaxy gathered to discuss an alliance, a gathering that would decide the fate of many worlds. Yet when the door opened and a small human stepped inside, all conversation stopped. Every pair of glowing eyes turned toward him. The figure was Lieutenant Elias Ward, the newly assigned Terran representative, a man barely reaching the shoulder height of the smallest predator in the room. He walked with calm precision, his boots echoing softly, his expression steady, though he could feel the heavy weight of hundreds of hostile stares pressing down on him. The first voice to break the silence came from a massive creature covered in black scales and plated armor, a Vornathi war chief whose claws were as long as daggers. "What is this fragile thing?" the alien hissed, its words dripping with mockery. "A messenger from a prey world?" Laughter followed like rolling thunder, deep and cruel. The others joined in, some pounding their fists against the table, others showing teeth in amusement. Elias did not react. He stood still at the center of the room, his eyes calm, hands clasped behind his back. When the laughter finally began to fade, he spoke in a clear, even tone. "I am Lieutenant Elias Ward of Terra," he said. "I am here because the Galactic Council believes your war is about to reach a point you cannot survive alone." The mocking sounds turned to quiet growls. "You dare insult us?" one snarled. "No," Elias replied, his voice steady. "I state the truth." The silence that followed was thick enough to crush air itself. Among the gathered predators, only one did not mock or growl, the apex of Vornath, a towering figure known as Krathar, whose reputation as an unstoppable hunter was whispered across star systems. His golden eyes watched the small human with cold curiosity. There was something different about this Terran. He did not lower his gaze like prey. Krathar leaned back in his massive chair, claws tapping the armrest. "Tell me, human," he rumbled, his deep voice shaking the floor. "What does your kind know of survival among hunters?" Elias met his gaze without fear. "Enough to know that strength without reason leads to extinction," he said. The room stirred again, murmurs rising. Some growled in anger, others in amusement. Yet Krathar's expression did not change. The apex raised one clawed hand to silence them. "Then prove it," he said. The chamber doors opened with a hiss, revealing a massive pit beneath the council floor, its depths lost in shadow. A metallic gate clanged open below, and a sound like thunder rolled up from the darkness, a deep, animal roar that made the very walls tremble. "The right of fangs," a voice whispered from the side. It was a Vornathi trial of death, a test meant for warriors of their kind, never for outsiders, and certainly not for a human. Elias glanced toward the pit as a creature emerged, chained and enraged, a war beast of Vornath, its body covered in armored plates, its eyes burning with hate and pain. The aliens above laughed again, expecting a short show. "Let the little Terran prove his worth," someone shouted. Krathar did not join their laughter. His gaze remained fixed on Elias, waiting. Without a word, the human removed his sidearm and tossed it aside. A wave of confusion spread through the chamber. "He fights unarmed," one muttered. Elias stepped forward into the pit, dust rising around him, the roar of the beast echoing like a storm. The creature charged, the ground cracking beneath its weight, but Elias moved with sudden speed, diving aside just in time as the claws sliced past him. He didn't attack. Instead, he watched carefully. The creature's eyes, its breathing, the strange metal collar sparking around its neck. It wasn't pure rage, it was pain. The beast turned again, howling, its movements wild and desperate. Elias sprinted toward the fallen chains, ducking beneath another strike, rolling across the dirt until he reached the collar's control point. One swift motion, his hand slammed against the release latch. A burst of sparks lit the pit, and the warbeast froze. The creature's breathing slowed. The light in its eyes shifted from fury to confusion, then something almost peaceful. Slowly it lowered its head toward Elias, who stood before it, unarmed and unmoving. Above, the hall fell completely silent. The human reached out a cautious hand and touched the beast's rough hide. "You're free," he said softly. The massive creature rumbled once, then stepped back and knelt, lowering its head. A whisper spread through the watching crowd like wildfire. The laughter was gone now, replaced by awe and something that almost resembled fear. Elias turned and looked up toward the council, his eyes meeting Krathar's golden stare. For the first time, the apex predator smiled, slow and deliberate. "Interesting," he murmured. Around him, no one spoke. The small Terran had walked into the den of monsters, and not only survived, but made one of their fiercest beasts bow. And in that stunned silence, everyone in the chamber felt it for the first time. The faint, unsettling realization that perhaps the soft-skinned species of Terra were not prey after all. The silence in the war chamber stretched like the void itself, broken only by the soft hum of the lights above and the slow, heavy breathing of the war beast that now stood beside the human it had tried to kill moments before. No one had ever witnessed such a thing. A creature bred for war, designed to obey only pain and control, now bowing to one who had freed it. The crowd of alien generals watched in disbelief, their sharp eyes flickering between the kneeling beast, and the calm, small figure of Elias Ward, who stood motionless in the dust, his hand still resting on the creature's armored head. The apex predator, Krathar, sat in silence at the top of the chamber, his golden gaze fixed on the human, his expression unreadable. The air was thick with confusion and unease, as if no one dared to breathe too loudly. Then, slowly, Krathar rose from his massive seat, the ground trembling beneath his steps. "Enough," he said, his deep voice echoing through the hall. "The trial is over." His command was calm, but carried the weight of final judgment. The others hesitated, unsure whether to protest, but none dared challenge the apex. Elias looked up at him, his uniform torn and streaked with dust, yet his eyes steady as ever. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Krathar studied him for a long moment before answering. "Now," he said, "you will explain how you did that." The words hung in the air like a test of their own. Elias glanced at the war beast, which still stood quietly beside him. "It wasn't rage," he said. "It was fear. That collar wasn't controlling it. It was hurting it. The creature wasn't trying to kill me. It was trying to escape." His words drew murmurs of disbelief. One of the Vornathi captains growled, "You call that mercy? That's weakness." Elias turned his gaze to him. "Weakness," he said evenly, "is when you can't tell the difference between power and cruelty." The hall fell silent again, the alien's growl dying in his throat. Krathar's sharp teeth showed in something close to a smile. "You speak boldly, Terran," he said, his tone neither mocking nor kind. "And yet you survived what no one outside my kind ever has." The apex glanced at the war beast again and then at Elias. "Perhaps I misjudged you." Then, to the surprise of everyone, he turned toward the council. "This human will stay," Krathar declared. "He will train under me until the next cycle." The chamber erupted in outrage. "Train? With you? He's a prey creature!" shouted one. "He dishonored the right!" barked another. Krathar's eyes flared gold and his voice roared like thunder. "He completed the right!" The hall fell instantly silent, every being frozen in place. "You mock what you do not understand," he continued, his tone colder now. This Terran faced death and chose to act with intelligence, not brutality. He did not kill because he did not need to. His gaze turned to Elias once more. "That," he said slowly, "is what separates a predator from a beast." Elias said nothing, but a flicker of emotion crossed his face, something between respect and disbelief. Krathar motioned toward him. "Come, human. Your lesson begins now." The great apex turned and walked out of the hall, his heavy footsteps echoing against the metallic floor. Elias followed without hesitation, his heart pounding, but his steps steady. The corridors of Vornath Prime were dimly lit, lined with moving shadows and ancient carvings of hunts, long past. Every creature that passed them gave Elias a strange look, half fear, half contempt. He ignored them all. When they reached the end of the corridor, a great door opened into a chamber filled with weapons, bones, and strange glowing stones embedded in the walls. Krathar stopped in the center, turning toward him. "Tell me, Terran," he said, "why didn't you strike when you had the chance?" Elias thought for a moment before replying. "Because winning doesn't always mean destroying something. Sometimes it means understanding it." Krathar's mandibles flexed slightly. "Understanding," he repeated, as if testing the word. "You think understanding has a place in war?" Elias met his eyes. "If it didn't," he said, "you wouldn't be asking me that question." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Krathar laughed, a deep, rolling sound that shook the walls. "You are strange, Terran," he said, "but I see now why your kind is feared even without claws or fangs." He gestured toward the weapons. "Show me how your species fights." Elias picked up nothing. He only raised his fists. "We fight with what we have," he said, "and when we don't have enough, we adapt." Krathar watched in silence, his golden eyes gleaming with a strange new respect. For the first time in countless years, the apex predator of Vornath felt something unexpected: curiosity. The small Terran had walked into a den of hunters and refused to act like prey. Somewhere deep inside, Krathar wondered if he had just met something even more dangerous than a predator. A human who could think like one, but choose not to be. Days turned into weeks, and within the steel caverns of Vornath Prime, Elias Ward trained under the watchful eye of Krathar, the apex predator himself. The Vornathi training halls were unlike anything a human could imagine. Massive chambers carved from the bones of extinct leviathans, their walls glowing faintly with bioluminescent veins that pulsed like the heartbeats of ancient gods. Every day began the same way: silence before the storm. Krathar would stand before Elias, towering and silent, his golden eyes unblinking. "Again," he would command, and Elias would move through drills designed for beings 3 times his size. His muscles screamed, his lungs burned, but he refused to stop. The other warriors watched in cruel amusement at first, waiting for the fragile Terran to collapse. But the collapse never came. Elias learned quickly. He couldn't match their strength or speed, but he had something they didn't: adaptability. When Krathar struck with a claw meant to shatter armor, Elias rolled, ducked, or redirected the blow with precision born of desperation and instinct. Each time, the apex adjusted his strikes, faster, sharper, but the Terran kept finding ways to survive. By the 5th cycle, the laughter had stopped. Now, when Elias entered the arena, the warriors fell silent, not out of respect, but uncertainty. He was no longer a novelty. He was something they couldn't categorize. "You fight like prey," one of the younger Vornathi hissed during a sparring match. "Always running, dodging, hiding." Elias grinned, blood running down his lip. "And yet," he said, "you still can't catch me." That earned him a hard strike that sent him sprawling, but even as he hit the ground, he rolled and came back up, defiant. Krathar watched from the shadows, his golden eyes gleaming. "He learns," he murmured almost to himself. That night, as they stood near the great fire pit that burned in the center of the hall, Crathar finally spoke what the others dared not. "Terran," he said, "why do you endure this? You could have left when you earned your life." Elias looked into the flames, his voice low. "Because I need to understand why your kind fights the way it does. You see everything as dominance and strength. But strength isn't just about crushing the weak." Crathar tilted his head, intrigued. "Then what is it?" Elias met his gaze. "It's knowing when not to strike." The apex was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Our kind does not believe in mercy." Elias nodded. "I know. That's why you keep losing the wars you start." The words hung like a blade between them. For a heartbeat, the fire reflected in Crathar's golden eyes like molten fury, but instead of rage, a deep growl of amusement rumbled from his chest. "You have courage, human," he said, "and a death wish." Elias smirked faintly. "Maybe both." The next day, Crathar changed the training. No longer simple drills. He took Elias beyond the cities, into the hunting fields of Vornath itself. The world outside was brutal. Red skies, jagged mountains, and forests that breathed mist laced with toxins. Creatures the size of tanks prowled in the shadows, and every sound carried the promise of death. "You want to learn our ways," Crathar said, as they stood on a cliff overlooking the glowing valley below. "Then you must survive here for 3 nights. No weapon, no armor." Elias looked at him, then at the alien wilderness. "And if I don't?" Crathar bared his fangs in something like a smile. "Then your lesson ends." Without another word, the apex turned and vanished into the mist, leaving Elias alone. The first night was chaos. The forest moved as if alive, whispering through the darkness. Something massive stalked him, its footsteps soft but deliberate. Elias didn't run. He waited, listening, feeling. When the creature lunged from the fog, he moved aside at the last second, driving a sharpened shard of stone into its throat. The beast fell, twitching, its blood glowing faintly blue. Elias stood over it, panting. "Adapt," he whispered to himself, echoing the first rule he'd ever learned back on Earth. The second night, he built a fire using the beast's remains, but he wasn't alone. 2 smaller predators circled him, drawn by the scent of death. Instead of fighting, Elias threw them the remains of their kin. They fed and then, curiously, stayed near him, resting close to the warmth of his fire. When dawn came, they followed him as if he were part of their pack. By the 3rd night, the forest no longer seemed like an enemy. Elias had stopped fighting it. He moved with it, silent, watching, learning its rhythm. When Crathar returned at dawn, he expected to find a corpse. Instead, he found the Terran standing atop the carcass of another predator, flanked by 2 smaller beasts that growled when the apex approached. Crathar stared in disbelief. "You command them?" he asked. Elias shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "They just understand I am not a threat, but I will be if they try." Crathar's gaze darkened, but not with anger, with respect. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "you were never prey after all." Elias smiled faintly. "Told you," he said. "We just fight differently." The apex nodded once. "Then maybe it is time the galaxy learned your way." The day dawned blood-red over Vornath Prime, the air thick with static and the scent of war. Elias Ward stood beside Crathar on the cliffs overlooking Firefall Ridge, a fortress carved into volcanic stone that now burned beneath enemy bombardment. The Kreth Dominion had come in full force, warships cutting through the clouds like blades, their plasma fire tearing through defensive lines. Below, the great predator legions of Vornath roared, their massive war beasts struggling to maintain order amid the chaos. Elias scanned the battlefield through smoke and ash, heart pounding but hands steady. He had seen fear before, in human wars, in alien duels, but this was something different. This was extinction. Crathar growled, his voice like thunder rolling through the air. They outnumber us 3-1. We fall today unless the gods intervene. Elias shook his head, his eyes sharp. No gods are coming, just us. The apex turned, narrowing his golden eyes. You speak as if you have a plan. Elias pointed toward the rampaging war beasts. They're panicking because they're afraid, not because they're weak. The Kreth use sonic disruptors to make them lose control. Shut that down and we stand a chance. Crathar stared at him for a long moment before nodding once. Then lead. Without hesitation, Elias sprinted down the ridge, weaving through fire and falling debris. The ground trembled with each step of the war beasts. He moved like a shadow, the smaller predators that had followed him from the forest now darting at his sides, his silent companions. When the first Kreth soldier appeared, armored in obsidian plates, Elias ducked behind a broken turret, tossed a plasma grenade, and kept moving. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he was impossible to predict. Crathar followed close behind, smashing through enemy lines with terrifying precision. "Forward!" the apex bellowed. "The Terran leads!" The words echoed across the battlefield, turning jeers into silence, then into a roar of unity. For the first time, the predators fought together, not out of dominance, but out of trust. Reaching the ridge's control bunker, Elias dove through shattered doors and slid across the floor, tearing open the control console. Sparks showered him as he rerouted the circuits, disabling the sonic towers that drove the war beasts mad. One by one, the creatures' howls shifted, from pain to purpose. Outside, Crathar saw the change instantly. The war beasts turned as one, their glowing eyes focusing not on the humans or the Vornathi, but on the invading Kreth. A primal cry rose across the ridge as the creatures surged forward in disciplined formation. Elias emerged from the bunker, smoke streaking his face, and met Crathar's gaze. "Told you," he shouted over the din. "You just needed someone to show them how to fight together." What followed was chaos turned into strategy. Elias coordinated the defense with calm precision, directing units where the line thinned, predicting enemy moves with eerie accuracy. Every command he gave, Crathar reinforced with unstoppable might. The apex became a storm of claws and fire, cutting through armored soldiers as if they were mist. The sight of the massive predator protecting the small human burned into the eyes of every soldier on the ridge. The tide turned. The Kreth began to retreat. Ships lifted into the sky, abandoning their ground troops in panic. Elias stumbled beside Crathar, exhaustion heavy in every limb. "It's over," he muttered. Crathar looked at him, breathing hard. "No," he rumbled. "It is only beginning. You have changed something in them, and in me." When the smoke cleared, the survivors gathered amid the ruins. The once proud Vornathi warriors, who had mocked the Terran for his weakness, now knelt as he passed. Elias tried to speak, but his throat tightened. He wasn't used to this kind of reverence. Crathar stepped forward, towering over him. "The small Terran," he said, his deep voice carrying across the ridge, "has taught us that strength is not in muscle or claw, but in the mind that guides them." The warriors struck their chests in salute, a sound like thunder rolling across the broken sky. Elias looked at the apex, his tired smile faint but genuine. "Guess we make a good team." Crathar's laugh shook the ground. "No, Terran, we make a dangerous one." As night fell, the ridge glowed with the fires of victory. Elias sat beside Crathar on a ledge overlooking the battlefield, both silent as the stars blinked through the smoke. The apex finally spoke, his tone softer than Elias had ever heard. "You could have run, Terran. You could have left us to die." Elias didn't look away from the horizon. "Humans don't run from family," he said simply. Crathar studied him for a long moment, then turned his gaze to the stars. Perhaps, he said slowly, it is time I stop seeing you as prey. The war was over, but peace on Vornath Prime was fragile. A silence built on ashes. Smoke still curled from the shattered ridges as the twin suns rose over what was once Firefall Ridge. Elias Ward stood at the edge of the apex citadel, his armor scorched, his left arm bound in bandages, watching the war beasts graze in the valleys below. For the first time since the invasion, the air didn't taste of blood or fire. Behind him, the great doors opened, and Crathar entered, his shadow stretching across the stone floor. The apex was changed. His wounds had healed, but his eyes carried something new, respect, even warmth. The council summons you, Crathar said. They demand to know what you are. Elias turned, brow raised. You mean who I am? The apex's mandibles twitched, the closest thing his kind had to a smile. Yes, who? Inside the grand hall, hundreds of Vornathi warlords filled the chamber, their armor still scarred from battle. When Elias entered, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with awe. The elder Apex rose from his obsidian throne. The Terran, he growled. The small one who fights like fire and bleeds like storm. You have turned our defeat into victory. Yet many here wonder, what claim do you make among hunters? The hall fell silent. Elias stepped forward, unarmed, his voice calm but sharp as steel. I claim nothing, he said. You don't need a king or savior. You need to remember what you already are. Predators who stand together, not tear each other apart. A murmur swept through the chamber. The elder Apex studied him, then leaned forward. And if I said that unity came from you, that without the Terran, we would still be beasts? Elias met his gaze. Then I'd say that means your people were ready for change. I just helped light the fire. Crathar stepped forward then, towering beside Elias. The fire he speaks of burns in us all, he said, voice echoing off the walls. This human fought beside me when the world burned. He saved my warriors when even I had lost hope. I called him prey once. He paused, eyes locking with Elias. But now I call him kin. The hall erupted in gasps, the word carrying deep meaning in Vornathi culture. Kin was a title reserved for those bound by blood and battle. The elder Apex rose, his ancient frame trembling. Then let it be so, he thundered. By the blood of the hunt and the fire of victory, Elias Ward, Terran of Soul, shall be named kin of the Apex. The warriors struck their chests in unison, the sound like rolling thunder through the citadel. Elias stood frozen, the weight of the moment crashing over him. He wasn't just an outsider anymore, he was one of them. Crathar placed a clawed hand on his shoulder. From this day, none shall mock the small Terran, he said proudly. For the Apex himself stands beside him. Elias managed a grin. Guess that means I can finally get some sleep. Crathar's laughter shook the hall. Sleep, kin of the Apex. Tomorrow we rebuild a world. Days turned into weeks. The broken cities were reforged. The divided tribes united under a single banner, not of conquest, but of honor. Elias trained young warriors, teaching them strategy, discipline, and something far rarer, empathy. The Vornathi began to change. Where once might ruled, now wisdom shared its throne. Crathar often watched from afar, pride hidden beneath his fierce expression. One night, beneath the twin moons, he joined Elias by the fire. When you first came here, he said quietly, I saw weakness. Now, I see the truth. Humanity's strength was never in muscle or teeth, but in the will to rise again and again. Elias looked up at the stars, their light reflecting in his tired eyes. We're stubborn creatures, he said. That's our curse and our gift. As dawn approached, a ship descended from the heavens, a Terran vessel, old and scarred like its occupant. Elias stared as the insignia of Earth glowed faintly across its hull. The radio crackled. "Commander Ward, this is the Odyssey. We've been searching for you for years. Is that really you down there?" Elias looked at Crathar, then back at the ship. "Yeah," he said softly into the comm. "It's me. But I'm not sure Earth's home anymore." The Apex's golden eyes glimmered in the light. "Then stay," he said simply. Elias smiled faintly. "Maybe I will." The Terran ship waited, engines humming in the morning light, but Elias never boarded. Instead, he stood beside Crathar atop the citadel, watching the ship vanish into the clouds. "You could have gone," the Apex murmured. "You could have left this world behind." Elias shrugged. "Maybe, but family's worth staying for." Crathar grunted, then bowed his head, a gesture of the highest respect among his kind. "Then welcome home, brother of the hunt." And so the legend of the small Terran spread across the stars, the story of the fragile human who tamed predators, defied extinction, and became one of them. Long after the battles ended, when travelers whispered of Vornath Prime, they spoke of two figures standing side by side beneath a burning sky, the Apex and his kin. The end.